diemžēl nav starptautiski atzīta valsts. Bet vēstnieks ne tikai vienā valstī, piemēram, tur Latvijā vai Lietuvā, bet vēstnieks Lielbritānijā, Ziemeļeiropā, Polijā un Baltijas valstīs. Tātad viņš ir vēstnieks vienlaicīgi 11 valstīs. Viņš šajā amatā ir relatīvi nesen, un faktiski šis ir tāds kā viņa pirmais brauciens, kur viņš vēlas iepazīties ar to, cik liela interese cilvēkiem ir par to, kas notiek Tibetā mūsdienās. Jo tas, ka ir interese, teiksim, par Tibetas kaut kādu agrīno vēsturi, par filozofiju, to mēs visi zinām, bet vai ir interese par to, kas notiek šodien, un vai ir vēlēšanās varbūt kaut kādā veidā tibetiešus atbalstīt. Viens ļoti būtisks jautājums. Vai šī saruna varētu notikt angļu valodā, ja ir nepieciešams tulkojums? Un ja ir, tad cik ir cilvēki, kam vajadzētu tulkojumu? Varētu angliski. Nebūs problēmas. So, you are very lucky. And I'm lucky too. I will not have to translate. So you'll be able to speak in English.
In Latvian.
But if you want, you can speak in Latvian too.
Yes.
So, Mr. TUBTEN SAMDUP kungs, you're welcome. Tātad sākumā būs viņa uzruna, nezinu, cik garu, un pēc tam jūsu jautājumu.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to greet you all. In Tibetan, we say tashi dile. That's how we greet. For me, it's a big thrill to come to Latvia because walking around Latvia, traveling, I picture myself one day living in a free Tibet. It's a dream that all Tibetans have. But right now, our dream looks very bleak, simply because China is, it's true. China is very, very powerful. And for every country in the world, China is a very important trading partner. That's something we cannot deny Tibetans. We've been in exile. His Holiness the Dalai Lama has been in exile for the past 51 years. Next month he's turning 75 years old. In the past 10 years he is constantly traveling the world. He spends perhaps 9 months out of the year on the road. And somebody like myself, I even get tired watching him travel, let alone traveling, because it's just too much. But at the same time, he feels he has no choice. Because when His Holiness stops traveling, Tibet starts disappearing from the radar screen. People start forgetting Tibet. So when His Holiness comes, same here in Latvia, if he comes to Riga, let's say, all of a sudden when he comes, newspapers, television will be interested, and they'll write about Tibet. When he leaves, they'll forget Tibet. It's same in Canada, same in the United States, same everywhere. So somebody like myself, I see that the Dalai Lama is the only thing that we have, Tibetans. Tibetans have nothing. China is, as I said, is a very important trading partner. And if we ask ourselves, do we have friends in Latvian parliament, in Latvian people? Of course we have. We have lots of friends, a lot of parliamentarians in Latvian government, I'm sure. Many of them love Dalai Lama, respect Dalai Lama. But at the same time, the Latvian politicians, their main interest is the welfare of the Latvian people. Latvia is no different from Canada. I mean, most politicians, that's their first duty. And I think Tibetans cannot be naive enough to think that just because the truth is on our side, it's a just cause, and it's a non-violent struggle, the world community is going to help us. So the time has come for many Tibetans to start thinking seriously understanding the geopolitical situation in the world, the role that China plays, for example. And today, for example, somebody like the United States, who has been a staunch supporter of Tibet, they find themselves in a situation, not only China holds so much of the hard currency, the U.S. needs China on North Korea, Iran, climate change, a whole lot of issues. And all of a sudden, Tibet looks very small when they look at all the situations. These are the political realities. So what do we do in a situation like this? On the other hand, we also look at the Dalai Lama saying he's getting old. What's going to happen to Tibetan people when he dies? Who's going to even care about Tibetan people? Even India, who knows? Is the Indian government going to let the Tibetans stay in India? It's a question mark. These are some of the things we have to think. So far, because of the Dalai Lama, Indian government has been very gracious, very generous host. Not only have they hosted the Tibetans, they've also allowed the Tibetan government in an exile in India. I cannot think of any government in the world who would allow this. The Indian government has. So the situation is very difficult, but at the same time, I think one of the reasons Tibetans are very different from many other groups is because of our Buddhist culture upbringing. We are very optimistic people. We always believe, in Tibetan we call it mithakpa. Mithakpa means impermanence. Nothing is permanent in the world. In human life, duje tamje mithakpa means anything that's constructive is destructible, including human life. So, in the same with the life of a state or a country, China is not going to be as powerful as she is today, maybe 5, 10, 15 years from now, just like Soviet Union. I'm sure many of you never thought, perhaps 30 years ago, that Latvia is going to be an independent country. But it happened. Things happen. And China is changing. It is going to change. China is changing, in fact, every day. In London alone, there is 90,000 Chinese students studying in London. That's a lot of people. Now, picture this, Paris, New York, Los Angeles, all over the world, which means millions of Chinese are outside China, that they cannot be brainwashed by Chinese government when they're outside. So these Chinese students, when they return to China, they're going to be holding important positions in the government and in the business community. They are the future leaders of China. And many Chinese today in China are wanting democracy. There's a huge labor problem in China. Not only ethnic minority problems like in Tibet and the Uyghur. There are many Chinese and Chinese themselves who are not happy with their government. There's so much corruption. And the gap between rich Chinese and poor Chinese is widening all the time. So sometimes even somebody like me, a Tibetan, who should be hoping that China will disintegrate and fall apart, but I don't, because I don't think Chinese people deserve it. Chinese people deserve a stable government. So in our minds, it is in the Chinese government's interest to slowly democratize and give people the rights that they are asking for, including minorities. So here we have a situation with the Tibetans, for example. The leader, or only leader, that most Tibetans, 99% of Tibetans inside and outside, who respect him, who has the loyalty, he's saying, I'm not seeking independence for Tibet. What I'm asking for is genuine autonomy for my people so they can practice their religion, culture, and spirituality. China can have defense, foreign affairs, and what have you. As long as Chinese government give us these autonomy, we'll be happy. What do we get in return from the Chinese government? This Dalai Lama is a liar. He's a fake monk. He cannot be trusted. Those kind of accusations, and it's just sort of sometimes it's not even, when you think about it, it's kind of funny that a nation like China, so powerful, so big, is afraid of one monk. It's difficult to understand. So, China is changing for sure, but somebody like me, I'm a Canadian citizen. I lived in Canada for 31 years. I have a Canadian passport. Somebody like me, my worry is I'm going to be fine with my family and myself. I have no problem. But I feel that the Tibetans in Tibet, they every day have to live under so much suffering. Like when I think about these Tibetan families, every day worrying that somebody sometime in the evening is going to knock on the door and somebody is going to be taken away, never to be seen again. How can I sit in Montreal, Canada, and pretend like there's nothing happening? And I just can't help myself. I have to get involved. So when you look at a situation like this, I don't have to tell you this because I'm sure you must know many of your friends, family members who've experienced this. So you know exactly what I'm talking about. So in a situation like this, if the Chinese government reached out to the Dalai Lama and said, okay, if that's what you want, we'll talk about this. If they really came to that kind of a resolution and the Dalai Lama is able to return to Tibet, and I know that most Tibetans, even those who always cry for freedom, they will return to Tibet reluctantly. They are not going to be happy, I know. But if the Chinese government came to some sort of understanding with the Dalai Lama, they will accept it. But the problem is, if the Chinese government keep playing this game, saying, okay, we know the solution to the problem of Tibet. Let the Dalai Lama die, Tibet dies with it. And that's the end of Tibet. And I think that calculation is very wrong. I say it's very wrong because knowing Tibetans, if the Dalai Lama is not able to return home and he dies in exile, for generations to come, Tibetan people will never forgive China. They will never forgive China. And that hurt and the anger that the Tibetans would hold for generations. And I don't think it's healthy for China to have Tibetans hold that grudge. Number one is that. Number two, if the Dalai Lama dies, and one day if Chinese government is ready to talk to the Tibetans, they're not going to find a partner. I think after the Dalai Lama, I'm afraid there's going to be a lot of factions within the Tibetan group. Some are going to be very militant, youth groups, all different. Even if they want to talk to, they're not going to find a partner. So right now, it's a perfect opportunity, and Dalai Lama is the solution that China needs right now, which they're just simply being short-sighted, in my view, because the Chinese leaders are saying, as long as we can hold on to power, they're not looking at what 20, 30 years from now, how China is going to look like. Not only with Tibet, the way they're handling everything. When Han Chinese themselves, over 90% of the population of China are Han Chinese. Minorities are no threat to China. It's a small percentage of populations. Why are they afraid? Now, if the Han Chinese population was 40, 50, and the minorities are like 50, then maybe they should be afraid. But it's not the case. So, this is the situation we are in, and the world community, many nations have always said, China should talk to the Dalai Lama's representative, all this. And there is talk, and I want to make it very clear to you that you understand. Since 2001, we met with the Chinese government 9 times. 9 times. So the question is, so what happened? Nothing happened. Because every time we went in there, China said very clearly, Tibet is not on the agenda. There's nothing to talk about Tibet. Tibet belongs to China, period. We can talk about the status of Dalai Lama. If and when Dalai Lama returns, we can talk about all his status. And the Tibetan side, the delegation, the Dalai Lama's representatives, they have strict instructions from the Dalai Lama to them saying, I am not an issue. Dalai Lama is not an issue. The issue is 6 million Tibetans, their welfare. Dalai Lama said, I'm fine. I'm fine in India. Indian government is very kind. I can go anywhere in the world. I have lots of friends. I'm not an issue with Tibetans. So China is playing for time. It's very convenient if a Latvian president or French president say to China, we would like you to have a dialogue with Dalai Lama. Oh yes, we're talking. But they have no intention to have any substantive result come out of these talks. So on my visit, one of the things that I do is when I meet with parliamentarians, I always say to them, when your prime minister or president or foreign minister tell you, oh, Chinese and Tibetans are talking, make sure that you tell them that yes, we know they're talking, but we also know that the talks are going nowhere. So as a government, you have to make sure that you tell the Chinese counterpart that we would like to see something substantive come out of these talks. And I think Chinese government needs to hear this from governments of Latvia, France, Britain, India, Pakistan, US, Canada, Australia, everybody. So Chinese government gets a clear message that, okay, now we cannot fool them anymore by saying, oh, we're talking. And now we're not only leaving it up to the international community. Somebody like me, I sort of gave up on lobbying Canadian Parliament in 2004. The reason I'm here in Latvia, and I just visited Estonia, then I'm going to Lithuania, I'm going to meet many parliamentarians, that's because that's part of my job. If I was on my own, not representing His Holiness, I don't think I would waste my time. I would rather spend my time sitting down with a Chinese person and talking than with a Canadian or anybody, because I find, as a Tibetan, the return that I get for my 1 hour of my time is better from a Chinese person. And I want to create a situation where Chinese government is going to find a shift, a fundamental shift in the way ordinary Chinese people are thinking. I want ordinary Chinese people to start thinking that, oh my God, we never knew that the Dalai Lama is not seeking independence. He's been asking for genuine autonomy. These are the things that he's asking for, which is all enshrined in Chinese constitution. Nothing more that we are asking which is not promised to minorities in their constitution. So they'll say, this is very reasonable. Why is our government being so difficult on these people? And I think if that, awareness is there, then I think the Chinese government perhaps may rethink its position on the Dalai Lama. Otherwise, they're just playing for game. And as I said before, China is going to change, but for us, the time is against us. We need to save Tibet before Dalai Lama dies. I personally don't see much hope. Once the Dalai Lama dies, I think Tibet is going to be so scattered, so without leadership. I've seen so many exile communities completely disintegrate. I have many Uyghur friends who've told us that you are very lucky to have a leader like the Dalai Lama. We are very strong, the Uyghur nation, but we don't have a leader like the Dalai Lama, and we have so much infighting within our group. So the situation that we find ourselves in, because of the Dalai Lama and because of our non-violent struggle, we definitely have many, many, many friends. See, someone like me, for example, when I visit Estonia, Latvia, I always have friends who help me bring here, bring there, and all this. I feel like it's almost like an extension of our office, because Tibetan Office of Tibet in London is like an embassy. Of course, nobody recognizes it as embassy, so the ambassador has to travel alone and has to look after 11 countries. It's not very realistic, but that's how it is. We have a lot of support, a lot of sympathy, but at the end of the day, I'm thinking to myself, as I said before, I've lived in the West for long enough to know that we have to be realistic. We have to also know that the Western governments have there are limits as to how much they can do. And I'll give you one example. I have few Canadian parliamentarians who have become friends over the years. I've known them very well. We go out together, we eat together, and all this. And some of them were Tibet supporters. And when they became ministers, when they got into the government, there wasn't much they could do. Because they told me, Canada has a policy, the defender of human rights, peace, and all the wonderful things. But the government policy, when it comes to China, there is another policy. Because China is a very different animal. So even when you are a minister, you're a big supporter of Tibet, you feel very strongly about this. And when cabinets meet to formulate policies, one or two ministers may say, we cannot ignore the Tibetan struggle. We must do something. This is unconscionable. So many of my constituents in my writing, they are very concerned. They want me to do something. Then you've got 23 other ministers. So, leave China alone. There is too much at stake. Too many Canadian jobs are at stake. All these things. So that's the political reality. And I know one day, if China's central government becomes weak and the Tibetans start making noise, Uyghurs start making noise, all of a sudden I know there are many governments who are going to be looking at the opportunity that now we may have to deal with independent Tibet. Then there will be more support. Because right now they also see that there's no point in supporting Tibet. So that's something sometimes I feel very difficult to talk to my own people, to the Tibetans, because Tibetans have always written petitions, letters to United Nations, President of U.S., President of everybody, thinking that they have so much power that they're going to do something. And of course they get answers. Like, answers are automatic. So we live in a very, very difficult situation right now. And the other concern that I also have is, this is something I try to tell politicians when I meet them, is now helping Tibet, just because Tibetans have the cause is just, and the Tibetans are non-violent and nice people with a nice leader, that's not good enough. But I say that since we live in a world where we are so preoccupied with terrorism, and we're so afraid, and every time you fly, I'm sure you say to yourself, why? What happened? Why do we have to do this? We're afraid that somebody is going to blow up something. And we always look at somebody who is the troublemaker. But I think we are responsible. We created a world like this. Terrorists are not born. They become terrorists. They're not born terrorists. So today, sometimes we find ourselves in a situation, many young Tibetans are saying, with all due respect to His Holiness and His non-violent and His message of peace, love, compassion is wonderful, very nice, but it's not giving Tibetans any dividend. Nothing has changed in the past 55 years. So many of them are seriously considering choosing another alternative being violence. Because many Tibetans who are born outside of Tibet, who are educated, raised outside, they're not like their parents who just pray every day and think, next life, reincarnation. They're not like that. When they do something, they want to see instant result. So if they're going to protest, they're not interested in having a peaceful prayer vigil protest. When they protest, they want to make sure that they're in the front page of the news tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock news. And how do you get that? Being violent. Because that's the only language they say the international community understands. So we, as citizens, we have a responsibility. So that's why when I meet parliamentarians, I say to them, as elected representative of the people, obviously you have the best interest of the people, and you also want to create a better world, better community, better city. You have that responsibility. So if you want to create like this, you have to make sure that you make some contribution. And here, that this is where I ask the politicians, if nothing else, it is in your own interest to make sure that Tibetan non-violent struggles succeed. Because if the Tibetans succeed, then there is hope that in future more groups who have grievances, they're not going to resort to violence. They may resort to non-violence because it gives you result. If the Tibetans fail, and the chances are Tibetans may fail, the message that will go to the future generations is non-violence is not relevant. Look at the Tibetans, they're gone, finished. Dalai Lama won Nobel Peace Prize. He led a peaceful movement. They're gone. So I don't think that any of us, including the politicians, would want a world that they see their children grow up in a violent world, that you cannot travel anymore safely. You always have to live in fear. And I think that's where, in some ways, I personally feel Tibetans have this struggle. I've been a big admirer of the Dalai Lama, and I've been a believer in non-violence and all the wonderful things. But in 2008, I got so frustrated, I even wrote an opinion piece which I've never written before, basically saying, I'm losing my faith in the Dalai Lama. Not because anything has changed. I felt that Dalai Lama is trying to set an example in the world at the expense of his people. He's talking peace, love, all these conciliatory things to China, saying China deserves to be the host of Olympics. China is good. Chinese are your brothers and sisters. In the meantime, Tibetan people are dying. And I just had to write that. It was very difficult for me. It's available on the internet if you want to check. It's called Dalai Lama's Impossible Choice. Because I felt that it's not fair for somebody like the Dalai Lama, who's an enlightened being, has so much love and compassion. But that's one thing, that's his belief. But at the same time, Tibetan people don't have to pay the price. That's within me, that argument. But now, I find myself as a representative of the Dalai Lama. It's very ironic, but this is the kind of, even for somebody like me at my age, I ask these questions. And when I see a young Tibetan, I don't blame them. They don't know any better. They're brought up in the Western culture. They only know what's out there. Television, they grew up with television. So it's not enough for, I think, anybody to say to non-violent groups, to say, oh, poor them, and sort of then forget about it. Because I think we have to actively get involved, not just to save Tibet, but to save ourselves. We're talking about the future, our children. So that's sort of my approach. And I guess I haven't said this in the beginning, of which I should have. Is I'm not a historian, I'm not a scholar, I'm not a politician, I'm not a diplomat, I've had no training, nothing. I started off as a musician, I studied anthropology, and then I went to engineering school, became an engineer. I worked 23 years in a Canadian high-tech company building flight simulators. But while I had the day job as a flight simulator engineer, every opportunity that I had, I worked for Tibet. Nights, weekends, I just gave myself totally for Tibet. I started an NGO called Canada Tibet Committee, and slowly it just grew to 11 branches across the country. It's still very active. So I'm in this job, total accident, by accident. I had no clue that I'm going to be the representative of the Dalai Lama. It all happened 9 months ago. I just got picked from Montreal, Canada, put in London. I have no training. Dalai Lama didn't sit me down and say, okay, you can do this, you cannot do that. Nobody's given me any instructions. I'm on my own. In English there's a saying, you swim or you sink. So that's the situation I'm in. So I'm sure when I go and meet politicians, diplomats, I'm sure I'm saying things I shouldn't be saying. But I'm speaking my mind. I have no diplomatic training. And as a concerned Tibetan, somebody who's really believes in His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, and someone who feels very strongly about his own people. And I think I have made a contribution, and I still believe that I do have perhaps 10, 15 more years to give to Tibet. And I'm going to do that. And it's not easy for me to just watch Dalai Lama getting older and older, and Tibet is getting nowhere. Sort of we get all shuffled around, and getting nowhere. And I do believe that Tibetans have a very rich culture that could really make an incredible contribution to the subcontinent, two most populous nations in the world, India and China. And today, for example, I'll give you one example. So many Chinese, especially young Chinese, affluent Chinese, who've done very well, many of them go to Tibet. You know why? Many of them Chinese are saying, okay, I've got a good job, I make really good money, I've got nice house, nice car. Why am I not happy? And that remote part, Tibet, why these people are happy? So many of them are going there to investigate. So many Chinese are getting into now Tibetan spirituality. So when I go to Dharamsala, every year I see more and more and more Chinese from mainland China coming to take teachings from His Holiness. So I'm thinking, all these Chinese who come to Dharamsala to take teachings, they go home as Tibet friends and the Dalai Lama friends. Not because Dalai Lama has brainwashed them, but they've seen the man that they've been told to hate in person, and they all of a sudden realize that this man is not as bad as our government tells us. With the same token, all the Chinese people that my initiative, the office has reached in the past 4.5 years, now that numbers over 10,000. They have become the extension of our Tibet office in China, educating other Chinese. So there is hope, and I think that's the most intelligent way to expedite the change in China, and also perhaps even a very Buddhist way, a non-violent way, rather than taking up arms and being hated. So I think I've covered, and that's about it. And if you have any questions, I'll be very happy to answer.
Ja ir jautājumi, tad lūdzu, ja varat angliski, ja ne latviski vai krieviski, es iztulkošu. Lūdzu, droši.
Can I please, Your Excellency, ask about the culture? What is the situation of Tibetan culture in their native country? Because as I know this culture as the only one on this planet being absolutely spiritual. And is not it destroyed now? And how do you feel the survival of this culture?
It's very, very difficult. I think, you see, the reason His Holiness the Dalai Lama, from the start, when he said he's not seeking independence, and I think there's a reason why he's done that, because many young Tibetans feel that, how can you do this? This is the only bargaining chip that we have if we want to negotiate with China. You ask for independence, and then perhaps you may not get independence, maybe autonomy. But Dalai Lama from the beginning said, I'm not seeking independence. Only because he feels the Tibetan culture is slowly dying. It needs to be saved. The only way that it could be saved is Tibetans can return to Tibet and has a true autonomy. Like I give you many examples. I've lived in Quebec, in Canada, for 31 years. Quebec wants independence for a number of years. We've had 2 referendums and they lost. Quebec is still part of Canada. But Quebec has its own Department of Immigration, for example. Canadian government. Quebec is the only province in Canada that has Department of Immigration. Quebec has its own education system. Canadian government gives tax money to Quebec, so Quebec can run their own school. Every immigrant that comes into Quebec has no choice but to send their children to French school. But similarly, Chinese government can do those things as a model. Chinese government can say Tibetan culture is very important. It's a very important minority, Tibet, and their cultures needs to be preserved. And they could say to all Chinese officials, if you want to live in Tibet, work in Tibet, you must learn Tibetan. Because the official language in Tibet is going to be Tibetan. If the Chinese government says this, it'll send a very strong signal to the Tibetans saying, yes, the central government respects our culture. These are trust building is through these kind of actions. So the reason Dalai Lama has done this is he feels that unless Tibet has some control over its destiny, this very rich culture, which can have so much, I find it strange saying this, being a Tibetan myself. I think Tibetans have so much to give, so much to give. If it's lost to the humanity. And today, I'm sure you've read lots of books, and America is very clear that out of all the religion, most scientists find the Tibetan religion has something in there that interests them, how spirituality, how the mind works. So the Dalai Lama and the scientists, every year they have Mind and Life Conference. So East can learn so much from the West, West can learn so much from the East. So and the Dalai Lama is such an open kind of man that, I don't know, maybe about two weeks ago, there was an opinion piece in New York Times by the Dalai Lama. And he talked about, he says when he was a little boy, when he was growing up, he used to think that Tibetan Buddhism is the best religion in the world. And he said, over the years after he came out, he realized that that's not really true. Every religion teaches the same thing. And the Dalai Lama is one of those religious leaders who travels the world telling people, don't become Buddhists. If you're Jewish, stay as Jew. If you're Christian, stay as Christian. If you're Hindu, stay as Hindu. And it's like a food, right? If there's something nice in the Tibetan Buddhism, take that. But it doesn't mean that you have to put on robes and become a monk and reject everything that you're born with. Because one of the things that His Holiness tries to do in his own way is to promote religious harmony in the world. So when the Dalai Lama travels, when there is interfaith services in New York, Toronto, Los Angeles, it's always a huge success because religious leaders from different faiths, they come because they don't see the Dalai Lama as a threat. And it's a wonderful, all different faiths coming together, and most of the time it's in a church, and they pray together. It's a wonderful, because so much war is being fought in the name of religion. So sometimes we see that the Dalai Lama is making so much contribution to the world, yet when it comes to his own people, saving his own people, he's fighting a very lonely battle. Wherever he travels, the prime ministers, the president, they all like to take pictures with the Dalai Lama. But the support that Dalai Lama gets is empty words of support, nothing tangible. So it's very difficult. But at the same time, as I said before, Tibetans are very optimistic. Someone who believe in impermanence. So our hope is still there. Our hope never dies. That things will change. There will be a Tibetan say Nima Timbe Wane Tangwe Tuijik Shari means the sun that's clouded under that, covered under that black cloud will come out one day, sooner or later. So that is the hope that the Tibetans have. And we hope that that happens before Dalai Lama dies, before Tibet completely sort of disappears from this earth.
Lūdzu, vēl jautājumu. Izmantojiet šo iespēju, jo faktiski es nedomāju, ka tik drīz tāda iespēja būs, un šī ir otrā reize, kad kāds Dalai Lamas vēstnieks ir Latvijā. Pirmā reize bija tā, ka bija Dalai Lamas vizīte 2001. gadā, bet tad viņš vienkārši bija kā pavadītājs, viņam nebija iespēja, teiksim, tikties pašam. Tā kā, šī ir reta iespēja.
I have a question. Mr. SAMDUP, for sure your words will stay in our hearts and mind, and hope so stay for a long time, till next time you come. But what Latvian people, Latvian citizens can do for Tibet? Just examples or some other experiences from other countries. What people can do, because people understand there's a problem,
yes,
and also when I talk with people, they say, okay, but what can I do? So maybe some kind of experience. Thank you.
One, I think it's not easy for Latvians or any non-Tibetans to sit down with the Chinese, because Chinese will always say, you don't know anything, you haven't seen the country, you don't know anything. Tibetans are happy in Tibet, Dalai Lama is lying, the TUBTEN SAMDUP is lying, you don't know. So they may not know. But if you do have an opportunity, that if you're a student, sometimes I met an Estonian student who said she shared a room with a Chinese student while she went to school, and every time she brought up Tibet, the Chinese person didn't want to hear anything. So it took a long time, and slowly they started talking about Tibet, and then she gave them some information on Tibet, and she said it was nice. So I'm educating Chinese if you can, if you have some Chinese friends that you can talk to, I think that's very helpful. That's my view. The other thing is making sure that your members of parliament, all of you have a member of parliament, taking the time and asking for a meeting with the member of parliament and sit down and say, look, I'm very concerned about the Tibetan situation and the Dalai Lama, and this is a peaceful, non-violent struggle that needs to be supported, and you as my member of parliament, I'll count on you to support. Because the reason I said this is, I know many politicians, they all want to get re-elected. And every constituent, every voter that comes to them and talks to them, they take a mental note saying that, okay, I have somebody who came to see me today about Tibet. And that one individual becomes 25 people in their mind, you see. So if there is a situation, let's say there's a parliamentary debate on Tibet in the parliament, and there's a vote that needs to take place. If you have approached your member of parliament, that parliamentarian voting yes on Tibet is higher because you've already communicated. If this parliamentarian says, I have no voters who are concerned about Tibet, in fact, I have more voters who are Chinese. Maybe not. And the reason I say this, it's very symbolic, because sometimes, let's say, I'm not a firm believer in resolutions. Resolution this, resolution that. It's good, but I'm not a firm believer. But when it comes out, it sends a very strong message to the people in Tibet. They listen to radio every day, like many of you have done when you were under the occupation of Soviet Union. You watched Soviet Union all the time, especially when it was becoming weak. The Tibetans listen to radio all the time. And any little thing, if they hear saying, okay, in Estonia today on Parliament they had a debate on Tibet, and the overwhelming overwhelming parliamentarians supported the resolution, this and that. It sent them so much hope, you know, and these things matter because these people live under so much suffering, and when they feel that world community is slowly forgetting them, nobody cares anymore because China is becoming so strong, you know, that hope needs to be kept alive. And right now, Dalai Lama has single-handedly kept the hope alive with many Tibetans. Sometimes it's very unrealistic. For some reason, Tibetans are not dumb. They're intelligent people. But when it comes to Dalai Lama, for some reason, they don't think. They think the Dalai Lama has some magic wand that one day he's pull out and everything is going to be okay. And it's like my parents. Their devotion to the Dalai Lama is absolutely blind faith. The Dalai Lama cannot do anything wrong. He is the Buddha, he is everything. Somebody like me is a little different. If Dalai Lama says to me, jump off that cliff, I don't think I will jump. My father will jump. Seriously. That's the kind of generation difference. And my son is even more. My son even doesn't believe in karma. He thinks karma is just useless, you know. So, I mean, things change. So, as a Latvian, I think that's one thing that you can do. And also the other thing is, it's also important that once in a while, I know in Riga there's a Tibet support group. Joining the Tibet support group and see what you can do in sometimes classrooms, talk about Tibet to school children, you know, those kind of things. And also writing to newspapers, calling radio stations. If you see a program on Tibet, take 5 minutes of that time and pick up that telephone and call the station saying, I enjoyed this program that you showed today. Because media, they need also feedback from their viewership and readership. Because they will only start showing more programs on Tibet if they feel that there is a population out there who actually is interested. If nobody responds, that they won't. I mean, I've learned it the hard way in Canada. Many times when we have demonstrations and things, we'll send out press releases. And in the beginning, they'll come. And after a while, nobody shows up. Media. The reason? It's too boring. There's nothing. Bunch of people come, they pray, they have a candlelight, then they go. No excitement. So we're thinking, what can we do? We don't want to do violent things. So again, you have to start thinking very creatively. So sometimes we will have people call media and will say, by the way, I heard that there is a protest by the Tibetans. Can you tell us where? Then they'll dig up the press release that we've sent. That's all in such a place. And if 3-4 people call, then there's some interest. Then they will start thinking of sending somebody to cover that. Otherwise, that's how things work. And you learn it by doing it, and then you have to be creative and innovative, and sort of, you have to go in there. So I'm always coming up. For example, I'll give you one perfect example. When I first came to Montreal, that was in 1980. And Montreal has the third largest St. Patrick's Parade. You know St. Patrick's Parade? When all the Irish people go and they drink and they have lots of fun and party and all this. And it's covered live on television. And there's about 500,000 people lined up on the street. And at that time in Montreal, not many people knew Tibet. So I said to myself, okay, we have to be creative. So I called the marshal of the St. Patrick's Parade. And I said, the Tibetan community would like to take part in the St. Patrick's Parade. He was very surprised because usually there's no visible minorities taking part in St. Patrick's Parade. It's all white people. So he said, may I know why you want to take part in St. Patrick's Parade? And I was in some ways sincere, because when Tibetans made an appeal to the United Nations in early 60s to help Tibet, Ireland is one of those countries who supported. And I said, basically, we remember Ireland how supported Tibetans, and we want to join in your festivities to show our appreciation. So it took them 3 days. I think they had a meeting. And then after 3 days they came back and said, yes, we would love to have you come. So when the day came, it was so cold. It was in March, very, very cold. And the Tibetans, we were like 40 or 50 Tibetans. We got all dressed up. And we had, Tibetan clothes and Tibetan banners and symbols and drums and all this. So we joined. And the next day, and television, newspaper, radio, everywhere they're talking about Tibet. These colorful people from Himalayas came, these Tibetan, So all of a sudden in Montreal, people knew that there was a Tibetan community, and we got the exposure. And it wasn't a violent kind of thing. It was a very festive, nice way. So I feel that the community, like the Tibetans, we have to be creative, innovative, and there are ways, and we have to find alternatives to doing things, and that's always that we feel, as I said before, the Dalai Lama feels that Tibetans can perhaps show to the world that there is an alternative to violence. And I think if the Tibetans succeed in this struggle, that the world community pays attention and rewards for its behavior, and then perhaps more groups in the future would pick up non-violence rather than violence. It was a little too long, but
Perfect.
Yeah.
Now your time.
You were talking a bit about internal contradictions among the Tibetans regarding how they should proceed, methods of work, and also what the freedom for Tibet really means. Is it just autonomy or is it independence? And I was wondering whether Tibetan diaspora talk about that among themselves, or is it something that is decided unilaterally just by Dalai Lama, or is there some institutions or some media circulated among Tibetans where you can discuss these issues?
Well, I think it's a very, very valid, very good question. I cannot deny that there is any Tibetan out there who does not want freedom, independence. I want freedom, independence. So it's really, so the question is, then how come you're not asking for freedom and asking only for autonomy? And also your question, is this Dalai Lama's unilateral decision? And I think, in some ways, I think you can say that Dalai Lama has made that unilateral decision. But before he made that decision, he has asked Tibetans at least 2 times, what he calls his way is middle way approach. And then Tibetans had at one time Rangzen. Rangzen means freedom. Then Rangda, Rangju, which means self-determination. And then Umelam, which is the middle path. We had 3 options. And the Dalai Lama has always preferred the option middle path, which is Umelam. which is still the Tibetan government's policy today. The reason he's done this is when he asked the Tibetans to meet and discuss, and you tell me what you want. Tibetan unanimous decision was, whatever your holiness, you will say, we are going to be happy with this. We'll follow. And I think maybe the Dalai Lama must have had some advisors, because I'm not privy to that, decided that realistically, if you look at the geopolitical situation, asking independence, yes, we can. But getting that independence, or even any government in the world touching it, very difficult. Even India recognizes Tibet as part of China. So Tibetans can say, we want total independence. I don't think any government in the world is going to touch it. And look at right now, when we're not even asking for independence, asking for genuine autonomy, still many countries are shying when it comes to China. So Dalai Lama has done it again 2 years ago. Okay, I'm sending my representatives talking to the Chinese. I'm losing faith with the Chinese leadership. So what do you want to do? You talk, let me know. That was in 2008, fall. Tibetans from all over the world came to send in their representatives, everything. They had a meeting for 2-3 days. At the end, again, whatever His Holiness wish will follow it. And then his representatives went for the 9th round of talk with the Chinese. And when they came back, they said, nothing changed. China is still not budging. So many Tibetans are bitching, saying, oh, why do we keep talking with the Chinese when they don't care? You know, it's a waste of our time. It's humiliation. And China is getting even worse and worse. Their personal attack on the Dalai Lama is increasing, and da-da-da-da-da-da. So now, again, horror stories of what they've gone under. Who has complete trust of these people, that he's their God. What can he do? What can he do? I mean, I think it'll be very popular thing for him to say, that, oh, we're going to go for total independence or nothing else. Many Tibetans will be very happy to hear that. But Tibetans in Tibet, they have to suffer every day. For how long? So I think His Holiness wants to see a little bit of that alleviation of that sort of kind of suffering that the Tibetan people are going through, coming in terms with the Chinese government. And so far, unfortunately, it hasn't happened. So, did I answer your question?
Yes, I did. I was thinking while you were talking, for as long as Dalai Lama is still keeps this idea of autonomy, maybe the way forward in order to gain more supporters, and judging by how the previous approach hasn't worked, maybe it would make sense to not focus that much on Tibet's autonomy, but make a bigger vision for China as a whole, for all the groups that could live, peacefully together under, for example, democratic circumstances, with human rights. In this way, showing that this is not just a problem of Tibetans. It's also a problem of other minorities living in China, and also Chinese people themselves should be interested in gaining more human rights or democracy. Maybe a broader vision would help, if nothing other has worked.
I think you're absolutely right. I think You know, when I said earlier why China is so afraid of one simple Buddhist monk, it's because I think they see in him that the potential that he could be the next leader of China, perhaps. Because about a month and a half ago there was a poll done in 7 or 8 Western countries, and the most popular leader in all those countries was Obama and the Dalai Lama. And Germany, for example, Dalai Lama beat Chancellor by many, many numbers.
And also Pope, which is by nationality German, Dalai Lama is more popular than Pope.
Yes, yes. So I think what you were saying, in some ways, Dalai Lama is very popular with democracy students. Very, very powerful. But I think Dalai Lama also is very careful not to create a tension within Han community. Because when Dalai Lama is not creating any problem for the Chinese, for the Tibetans, they're still blaming everything on the Dalai Lama. March 14th, in 2008, when all that Tibetan people burning cars and, you know, destroying stores and all this kept showing, they all said this is all Dalai Lama's fault. He's responsible. He created all this. And Dalai Lama had to openly say to the press conference, he says, I have nothing to hide. Chinese government is more than welcome to come to Dharamsala and go through all my office files, everything. I would love to do that. You see, Chinese government is like this. So, I mean, vision, I think he hasn't even said it openly, but Uyghur leaders have said, and they are saying that the Dalai Lama's approach, that's exactly what they're also looking for. The Qadir recently has said many times. So if the Tibetans and the Chinese somehow come to some peaceful resolution, and there is hope that with the Uyghurs also. And that's why in some ways I think Chinese government has an opportunity that they are just missing out miserably. Any conflicts around the world, they would love to have a situation, whether it's the Middle East or anywhere else, your partner who is very giving and open. And as far as we're concerned, I think Dalai Lama has given, in Tibetan we say, given the whole store. Everything is given. We have nothing else to give. What else can we give? We say we're not asking independence, and that's the only thing we had. And that is, by the way, birthright of the Tibetans, right of any human being, the fundamental right to determine your own future, self-determination. That's something enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But I think that's also is given away. And Chinese government is being a little bit too, I don't know what the word is, greedy or what have you, I mean, like unreasonable. And that's the side of their government that I want to show to their own people, saying, you decide. What do you think? This is the situation. You decide. This is what your government is behaving. This is our position. And then I think the Chinese people are intelligent, they're human beings, they'll say, my God, this is not right. And that's the kind of situation that I want to sort of create within China. So when I talk to my staff, I always say to them, every day you come into work and you start chatting with somebody, never underestimate. You never know who you're talking to. Maybe one day you'll be talking with the daughter of a Chinese president or prime minister or son or something. You never know. Because in my lifetime, I've seen so many political realities have changed in the leadership of certain countries because of their children's involvement in Tibet movement. Children have influence over their parents, and parents happen to be leaders.
Former president. So it will be only fragments, so don't worry, we will not show the whole His Holiness visit, which took 2.5 days, so it will be like fragments of his visit. To have an impression. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So this is only 30 minutes and we came when it's already started. So. monks were visiting one of the schools, a chig.Slova school, school which Zaidi is connected because her daughter studied there.
Varbūt ar arī tur bija toreiz.
During the history of Latvia, that a group of monks are visiting a school, and not simply visiting but doing some chanting. So, first time experience, which I don't think has been repeated since these 9 years. Try some dancing with these masks. Puika to spiedīgo poru mākslinieks Barbāls Lūgas dāls, kas tagad ir šitāds lielāks pamāt. Latvian flag and Tibetan flag. I don't remember, maybe you'll see something like friendship or
we'll see right here. Tibet written in Latvian, Tibet, and Latvia also written in Latvian. And in the middle of Buddhism, here former president and his holiness.
saskaņā, kas valda sabiedrības locekļu starpā, un cilvēks saskaņai ar visum augstākajiem spēkiem. Pieņemsim šo viņu mīlestības dāvanu ar dziļu pateicību un novēlēsim, lai visuma svētība nāk arī ar Tibetas tautu. Šī mandala ir veidota kā izpausme tai saskaņai un harmonijai, ko cilvēks vēlas veidot pats savā dvēselē, ko mēs vēlētos redzēt saskaņā, kas valda sabiedrības locekļu starpā, un cilvēks saskaņai ar visum augstākajiem spēkiem. Pieņemsim šo viņu mīlestības dāvanu